Now I have the privilege of introducing our second speaker for today, the powerhouse that is Terry Burke. So for those who don't know, Terry Burke has led the Independent Education Union, Queensland and Northern Territory branches since 1995. He started his teaching career as a secondary teacher in Catholic education in Toowoomba, later holding administrative and leadership roles there. Terry is extremely passionate about his members. He's passionate about the welfare of his members, and you could safely say he is member obsessed. Under Terry's leadership, the union has continued to grow in numbers and, more importantly, in density and member activism. In addition to this, Terry is also a director at the Teachers Union's Health and NGS Superannuation Fund. Please join me in welcoming Terry Burke to the lectern.
Tiana, thank you for that kind introduction. Before I commence, if I too could acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the First Nations people and the Turrbal and Juggera peoples in this instance. It's important, I think, particularly this year when we have the opportunity to actually recognise for the first time in colonial history of this country that the First Nations people were here. And certainly we will, as a union, be supporting the voice. And for those of you who have a vote, I would encourage you to support the voice as well. It is a once in a lifetime, frankly, once in a centuries situation where we actually get to do a good thing and right a wrong. Chris has written this extraordinary book. He makes a comment at one point, it's easy to understand, hard to execute. But as Chris makes the point, intent and execution are two different things. Now, Chris makes a number of very telling observations in this book. Firstly, that client service and client experience is an exercise in organisational change. It's not an end in itself, it is an exercise in organisational change. And any of the organisations that I've been involved in, whether it's a super fund, whether it's the health fund or this union, that has been the intent of our engagement with Chris. That the whole insight is very much one of how are we going to change as an organisation. And Chris makes the point, at the end of the day, these things distill down into some very, very simple understandings. Complex, but simple. Firstly, the people that you deal with in your organisation like to be valued, they like to be cared for, and they like to be supported. Now, their very core emotions is the point that Chris makes. And he goes on then to remind us that emotions can actually be measured, they can be planned, and they can be executed quite powerfully. Now, I had the experience at the weekend being at a function centre, roll up, 3 people. There's not too many Gen Zs in here, so I can give them a little burst. There were 3 Gen Zs sitting at this counter. I've got a booking. I walk up, silence. Intense on the microphone, chit-chat, look, computer, look, I'm standing there. It would have been a full 4 minutes before someone looked up and actually did something. Now, as I walked into that venue, did I feel valued? No. Did I feel cared for? No. Did I feel supported? No. So without it being a treatise, they did actually ask me to make comment on the experience. Well, did I have fun? I didn't feel cared for, I didn't feel valued, and I certainly didn't feel supported. So it's not just to score the NPS, it's actionable insights. And if I at times get a little bit lecturing and hectoring within my organisations that I'm part of, that's the point that I make. This is not feeling good about we've got a number that happens to be better than it was last year. The real issue is what are we learning that we can do to do better? So the need for critical insights runs through the themes in Chris's 10 things not to do. Be critical, appreciate the insights and act upon them so that ultimately it's embedded in the organisation. Now finally, this is not just a book about Client Experience and NPS. This is a book about Chris. Now, it's said that every first book is an autobiography. Now, it'd be stretching it a little bit to say that this is autobiographical, but any of you who know Chris and you read this book, you know Chris just runs replete through these chapters. It's full of stories, it's full of yarns, it's full of the growing up Chris and the mistakes he made and the experiences that he had, all coming together to, and then I realised. And that's the autobiographical part of this book, that Chris shares himself on his journey as he goes through the experience of what this insight, client experience and NPS is about. So Chris, I enjoyed reading it at 2 levels, and I'd encourage you to read it at those 2 levels, that yes, it's about these things, but it's also getting to know that extraordinary individual, Chris Roberts. So finally, it's a call to action, this book. I certainly am more than prepared to step forward and to respond to that call to action, because as Chris reminds us a number of times, there's no action, there's no improvement. And that's what we all must do in organisation, is improve.
Thank you so much, Terry.